Friday, November 1st. I hate to break it to you, but good news. You know, mortgages, bond market, thirsting for bad news, so rates will go down. The news this week across the board was so good that rates didn't even go up. That's hard to do. The Fed did cut a half a point. Chair Powell, 1 year ago, was so entangled in communications of the Fed's intentions that he unintentionally drove mortgage rates up to 5.25 and nearly cratered the economy. I thought in my impatience, the impatience of all market people, that he was a bust. I thought by January, February, when he was still struggling, that as a chair he was a bust. And since then, he has learned the game. His post-Fed meeting press conference this week was an absolutely perfect, opaque performance. You really had to struggle to get through all the fog and confetti that he threw up about the Fed's future intentions, and he ain't talking. He made it clear that it's going to depend on what they see in the data, and no, I'm not going to tell you which data I'm watching. It's great, just a terrific job. He tilted, he showed his hand a little bit. It's hard not to in some ways. The press conference is conducted by the finest financial reporters in the world. These are European, Asian journalists, the best that we have here in the States, who attempt to grill the Fed chairman to get him to make a mistake. And one individual asked if the Fed, under what circumstances the Fed might increase interest rates. And Powell looked at him as though the man might have asked how the fishing was at his desk in his office. The Fed is not about to tighten. The Fed is pausing. It is not pausing in a balanced condition. It's pausing, still tilting to cutting if necessary. And hiking is not remotely on the agenda. Another person asked him if he felt the Fed was accommodative, which is Fed code for tilting to the easy side. And Powell dismissed him just about as fast as the other guy and said, the inflation rate is about 1.7, and that's where we have the Fed funds rate, which means the real cost of money is zero. The rate that the Fed went down to is just about what the inflation rate is. And classically, central banking, as far back as it goes, which isn't very far, it's about 150 years, classically, the easiest way to tell whether the Fed is easy or tight is the overnight cost of money, which the Fed determines, above or below the inflation rate. If it's cheaper to borrow than inflation, the Fed's easy. If it's more expensive to borrow than inflation, then it's tilting towards the tight side. So the Fed's still easy, but Powell, without doing any damage to markets, put the Fed on pause and told everybody, I'm not going to tell you why. It's great. The economic data, this morning, first Friday every month, we get the employment statistics from the immediately prior month. And the numbers are so strong that nobody believes them. And really nobody should believe them. We hang on the number of jobs created in the survey of non-farm payrolls. And the forecasts were for something like 125,000 jobs. But jiggered by the GM strikers on strike and coming off strike, census workers hired and then being laid off because it's a temporary job. But we'd be very sensitive to a move 50,000 jobs either way from 125,000. And instead, net of prior monthly revisions, the report is 200,000 jobs off of the forecast. So everybody just dismissed it, but it's hardly bad news. The accounting of jobs may be stronger than reality, but it's not bad news. Europe reported that its conditions were the same last month as the month before. Same as the last quarter, last 90 days as the 90 days before, which is an economic growth rate of 0.2%, which is terrible, but it isn't any worse. A reason for the Fed to continue to cut interest rates would be if the outside world is continuing to shrink, and it's not. It's stabilized. Interest rates in Europe actually have risen in the last month. So that bad news that would help the Fed take us lower, it's not there. There wasn't any bad news about the economy, nor was there any accelerating news, which is jeepers. How boring. Have a nice weekend.